Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we'll be looking at two of 2023's releases. A little later, we're going to be looking at William Oldroyd's film with Thomasin McKenzie and Anne Hathaway, based on Ottessa Moshfegh's book, Eileen. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about an A24 Showtime joint release called Earth Mama. This is the debut feature of director Savannah Leaf, who is a British music video director by trade. With two children in foster care, Gia, a pregnant single mother pitted against the system, fights to reclaim her family in her close-knit Bay Area community. She works to make a life for herself and her kids. So as I said, this is the debut feature of Savannah Leaf. There was a show recently that I attempted to watch, and I just couldn't do it because of the tone. It was a patron request, and so thankfully Ariana had watched the show already, and she was able to write the review. And that is it was a Netflix series, is that correct?
Yes.
Made with Margaret Qualley, which is about a mother, her child, going through a system trying to keep herself and her child afloat. And it made me think of this, or this movie made me think of that show, what I watched of it. And the reason I couldn't keep going with that show was tonally, it was just very uneven, in my opinion. It wanted to be sort of grounded and gritty, but then do things to kind of lighten the mood. And I think just my mentality is, if you're going to talk about social issues, I want you to ground it the whole time, almost like a neo-realist Italian movie or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ariana, what did you think of Earth Mama? What do you think of the tones these types of stories are told in and the tones they should be told in?
I think Made, if we were to connect it to with this one, unfortunately, because it's a series, it's this need in order to make sure that the audience is still listening and therefore doesn't feel too horrible about what's going on in this person's life. Earth Mama is more realistic into that setting. It's the realism and the seriousness that we probably might have wanted from a show like Made, with a little bit of sprinkling of humor there. But where Earth Mama kind of misses it is in the dialogue.
Yeah.
It is visually beautiful. That is one thing I'm excited to see what this director does in the future. But there was something missing in the way that the delivery was done that did not feel natural. And so it kind of leaves you wanting more.
Yeah, I would say I had similar feelings. I liked that it had kind of had this lo-fi ambient feel to the movie.
Yeah.
Which helped with the realism of it. It never felt through the images, nothing was ever being overly stylized. It felt like we were just kind of following this woman, Gia. I think they did a great job with wardrobe and makeup.
Yeah.
They looked very much just like working class Black people in America living in poverty, this sort of intergenerational poverty, where they've just kind of become very used to it, because it's very rare that they would see anyone in their social group kind of be able to climb out of it because of the way the system prohibits it. But I do agree with you. The dialogue was the part that didn't work for me. I think maybe because Savannah Leaf comes from a music video background where it's far more concentrated on image and the dialogue is being provided for by the artist.
Yes.
That the dialogue felt a little too on the nose, like very characters would say things that felt a little too exact, and not in a way that I have seen in real life, people in these types of circumstances talk. Most of the schools that I worked in were very low income, high Black population schools. And so I've had lots of conversations with Black single mothers who are struggling in very similar ways. And I didn't feel the way these women spoke most of the time, or especially during moments of high drama. That's where it really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Felt real. It almost felt that in real life, whenever tension gets that high, it's either kind of a shouting match or someone just becoming very quiet, very cold, and like leaving or glaring.
Yeah.
And in this, you would have characters explicating things in a way that I thought, I don't know if people in real life talk like that to each other.
Yeah, I think the best acted scene was when Gia is with her social worker talking about what.
Miss Carmen, is that? Oh, it's the white lady.
No, it's
social
the
worker.
white lady.
Yes, yeah,
Where
yeah.
she pushes the documents to the side, is like, none of this is gonna fucking help me.
Yeah.
That was the best scene because it was sort of like, yes, she had pushed a boundary, but not close enough to get kicked out of the office. Where the social worker can feel that the other person, like Gia, is aggravated, but like can't kick her out, but is also like offended herself. And where you feel like as an observer that you can understand both sides, even though at the end of the day you are supposed to be like, Gia is having it hard. And I think they did pretty well with the child actors, but because it was limited, right? We didn't have to see them on a we didn't have to see them to the point that it was kind of like, oh, this is a bad child actor because they loomed so heavily in the film. It was a phone call. It was a visitation where someone else was observing the visitation. But you could feel the tension because one of her children refuses to talk to her. And the son is the one that's clinging to her, or like the son calls her when he shouldn't call her. And you could see like the upset on her face. There are scenes that are almost made to cut the movie into different segments, and those scenes are when she's at the photography place that she works at. And I really thought that it was like beautifully shot. Like I thought, like, for example, the testimonies of like single parents talking, or people who were like within the custody system explaining, and those were obviously like real people.
But their dialogue felt like they were reading something. That was my problem. They didn't feel like they were speaking from the heart. It felt like something, maybe it was their words, but they were reciting something rather than just speaking.
Well, I think it didn't help with some of the acting being as stiff as it was.
Well, see, I would disagree, because I think we've seen plenty of films from directors who can get naturalistic performances out of actors, and they do it through improvisational techniques on set. And I think Savannah Leaf, debut film, young director, she just doesn't know how to do that quite yet. She's got the visual aesthetics down, but it's that getting the performance out of the actor that is going to resonate emotionally with the audience is lacking. And I was so frustrated with the movie because it had all the trappings of a film that I wanted to be moved by, but ultimately I couldn't be moved by it. And I felt like it fell on whenever there was the big emotional moments, the characters started talking, and it just felt like someone reciting the lesson of the day kind of thing.
Yeah, I think about, like, was that film that we watched was like 1001? 1001.
Similar-ish kind of
Yeah,
film.
and I think
sort of this woman a few decades later.
Yes, and what I thought was, afterwards watching it, I almost wish that they had their dialogue. They probably would have delivered it a little bit better, or a little bit more naturalistic, because at the least the main actress in that film was in, like, you could not take her eyes off of
She
her.
felt authentic in
Yes.
1001. While I don't know if Tia No More, the actress who plays Gia, has that performance in her, but just based on this movie, I didn't see it. There were moments, like you said, the moment in the social worker's office, where she kind of has this very honest outburst that did feel like the way someone would just kind of lash out when they were fed up. But the rest of the movie, I felt she worked much better in silent scenes. Like the silent scenes resonated.
Yeah,
they had
silent scenes were good. I think it was also just kind of, it's a confusing kind of thing because, like, for example, Gia starts avoiding her best friend Trina, who happens to also be pregnant. The actress who's playing Trina is a little bit more charismatic at times. However, like, the moments that you kind of lose her is when she starts becoming like preachy, like God.
It didn't sound like
it was her, like, and it didn't feel authentic, so that's when you start losing her a little bit. And also, like, the points that she was kind of like talking about how they needed to keep their children.
Yeah, it felt what they call didactic, where like you're giving a lesson,
yes,
rather than someone. I couldn't feel her emotion in it.
Yeah, and it felt weird compared to when she's just being Gia's friend.
Yeah.
That felt very natural. That felt when she's just like, Gia, you need to do what these people ask you to do in order to get your kids back. That doesn't matter. But the moment that she's taking out a little booklet and starts like reading Bible verses, it doesn't feel authentic. And so you also don't feel the tension of their friendship pulling apart, because Gia again is silent, so we don't we need a little bit of like facial acting of just being like versus just dodging, right? It was, oh, she's there, I'm just gonna walk away. And it doesn't really fit from the little connections that we're hearing about her life. Like it's kind of confusing because people are indicating either she's too quiet or she's gotten in trouble in the past. But I needed to understand this character, even though I think the director did very well of feeding us bits of information.
When I think the women who are actors by trade in this film, so like the actress that plays Miss Carmen, who is overseeing the adoption process, and then the woman who plays Monica, who's the mother of the family that wants to adopt.
Yeah.
Both older Black actresses gave much more authentic feeling performances.
Yeah.
And I think they've probably been on more sets. They've performed more. I believe Tia No More, and then I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Dochi, who plays Trina, are both musicians.
Yeah.
And I don't think they've done a lot of acting. And you can definitely feel it in the movie.
Yeah.
That they are not professional. However, I would point to someone like, a Chloe Zhao, who does a movie like, The Writer, with all non-actors, but it's a very emotionally resonant film because I think you don't hand them pages of dialogue. You sit down with them and you talk about the intention of the scene. You talk about what the interaction should be like and feel like. And then you do improv exercises to help them bring that up out of themselves.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the feeling of that. Maybe they did that, but I didn't feel that.
No, I mean, despite the fact that the acting isn't superb, there is a wonderful texture about this film.
Well, like the hallucinatory scene is really good.
Yeah.
Near the end of the film, where she sees herself in the woods, and it kind of ties back to the title of Earth Mama.
Yeah.
Where there's this, and that title thematically is connected to the film, in that there's she feels a disconnect from motherhood because she has 2 older children that have been taken away. The specter of the child she's currently carrying being taken away is there.
Yeah.
But then there's this constant attempt to try to connect with nature in some way, in subtle ways. And in that hallucination, that's when we really see she feels like these urban environments are oppressive to her.
Yeah.
And there's this freedom in nature and getting away from these systems that she's trapped inside of.
Yeah, and it's a system where she isn't benefiting from. She's only being able to work part-time. There is a scene that can tug at the heart when she steals diapers from
it was a stroller at a park.
Yeah, stroller at a park. And that, I felt like that was a well acted scene because you could feel her panic. She's breathing faster.
But I think that's more to do with the visuals, because the director makes a choice to never show the white people who are talking about what she's doing and then following after her.
Yeah.
The camera tracks Gia. And I think it's more of the visual technique is what grounds the scene and makes it feel real and have tension.
Yeah.
Because Gia doesn't really say anything.
No. And I think so the guy that made Waves, the first film that we watched, it was
Trey Edward Schultz.
Yes.
He made Krisha and
Krisha. Yeah. There's something in the texture of Krisha that reminds me of this film.
Oh yeah, I can see that.
And it makes me excited to see what this director does in the future once she has a little bit more reins in the actors, which I think that's a difficult part, right? That's a difficult part of just asking them to deliver it is what you want. But maybe if there was just less dialogue, that would have been more convincing. It is just beautifully shot in so many different ways that it feels a little bit more what we would say European, French.
Yeah.
and some ways, which is like,
or almost like the Florida Project or Tangerine.
yes,
Like that uh those Sean Baker style, that kind
yeah,
of
and like
modern American neorealism.
Yeah, and Sean Baker's pretty good with the improvisation because he also hires people that
Not
are relate
actors.
closely
Yeah,
to
yeah.
what's going on. Um, that being said, like there is endless possibilities.
Well, I want to talk about like the themes of the film, because
Yeah.
there's some interesting themes, and they approach some ideas in ways that I don't think I've ever seen or at least seen in many American films. The way they approach adoption in this
Yeah.
movie is it never. I can tell that Leaf is making a concerted effort not to apply any sort of moral label to adoption,
Mm-hmm.
to view it with as complete neutrality as possible, but show you what are the good things about adoption, what are the bad things about adoption,
Yeah.
and let us watch Gia kind of sit in that and feel unsure because there isn't a clear moral choice. It's
Yeah.
whatever your decision is your decision.
Well, I think it's also this interesting thing where Gia opts for a black family.
Yeah.
Like she's flipping through the page and she's like, "Are they all white?" And like Miss C's like, "No, not all of them." And then she finally lands on the black family and she does meet them, and she's constantly trying to reassure her that it's okay. I had a sense that there is like a little bit of a predatory vibe at some point, not like excruciating high, but it was just sort of like the whole, "It's fine, you're okay. Oh, you haven't got a checkup? Don't worry, I'll take you to my clinic where I take all my girls and you'll be fine." And it's,
Well,
but I think it's also like the concern for Gia that you start to develop. Like, unfortunately,
because there is a conversation between Gia and Miss Carmen about what Miss Carmen is doing, because Gia does kind of push back, and Miss Carmen just kind of lays out like, my job is to make sure that young women like you get back on the right track, and that might involve giving your babies up for adoption. And she's very matter of fact about it, which is where I think that sort of non-judgmental aspect of the movie comes out. Is someone like Miss Carmen genuinely wants to see Gia do well, but Miss Carmen is also having to follow a system and a series of protocols, and she has limited options to present Gia with. She wishes that she could just give Gia a house, but I also get the sense that Miss Carmen has been through this enough times that she's kind of lost she has empathy for the girls, but she's not showing it.
it's like she's lost that sheen that a lot of nonprofit / like social workers get at a certain point,
She's
because
trying to reach the goal.
it's sort of like you see the failure again and again and again, that even though there is this emphasis that Gia, and also throughout the film, like your mother will always be your mother, and that like a lot of people within this film, of the documentary side of it, of like women talking about their addiction, or like people who were like given up to the system, saying they weren't even upset at their mothers, as Gia wonders, is this the right decision to give up my child? But she's also having to think about the 2 other children that she has currently in foster care, who will not be given up to her until she is able to fix her life.
Well, then I like how they pointed out that the impossible tasks that they've given her, where she has to complete so many hours of classes while also holding down a job that making a certain amount of wages. But there's a deadline for all these things, and there's no way for her to both do the job and do all the classes they're asking for and then to live in any way.
Yeah.
That it's just meant to be like, this should consume the totality of her life, is working, going to parenting classes, and then sleeping, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it feels very cruel, and none of the characters that we see in this story have their hands anywhere close to the levers of power in this system to do anything about it.
And I remember when I worked in nonprofits, when somebody would have to come in for like whatever stuff that we had to provide, it was the fact that like they would come in crying, because it's like, you're asking me to budget my money, but I don't have any money. And how we would feel frustrated, because it's like, well, you don't have to be here, but someone told them that they had to be there. And you're just, the system is so disconnected from each other. Like, they don't care what one person said. Is like, well, I told you you need to take this course and this needs to be signed by so person so I can get you this thing for you to survive a month, which isn't enough. And the fact that she's only being able to work part-time, but she's so pregnant that it's like, that's like this, the fear of even asking for more time, and then her having not been to the doctor as long as she has like declared, and her not knowing how long, like how
Close she is to,
she's
yeah.
pregnant until she goes to the doctor and they're like, oh
Any
yeah,
moment.
any day now you'll give birth. And you could just tell the look on her face, and she's like, what? Like, she has nothing for the kid.
Well, she thought she'd have time to figure it out, and she doesn't have time. But I think the film does an excellent job of highlighting the evils of capitalism, because the system is underfunded to help these people. Those who are working in the system, because of the underfunding, have a caseload that's impossible for them, in the same way that what they're asking from Gia is impossible from her. And so the result is everybody gets burnt out. Solidarity never happens. The social workers just checklist these people through the system because they don't have time to sit down and talk to them about why what they're doing is important and about what the purpose of each of these things is, in a way that's like human. And so they're just like, you need to go do this, you need to go get this signed, you need to do this. And so for Gia, there's no real, it's the same thing with like the prison system, right? There's no rehabilitation happening. Like if Gia did something that made her an unfit mother, she's not going to come out of this really understanding why she was unfit. It was just this white dominant system came in and took my kids away from me. And then they told me I had to jump through all these hoops to get them back. And that's all she's going to see it as. And I think there are aspects of the system that are good. And I think that we do need to get away from this tendency in a society of seeing children as the property of their parents. These are autonomous individuals who are developing and need to be raised by, the whole community. But the way the system currently exists in the States, it's so cold and clinical and detached that when your kids do get taken away, that the foster system isn't very humane.
No.
And there's no thought of having, foster parents that live in the communities where these children are from, so that those foster parents already have a relationship with the community, which I think would be a much better situation, because then it wouldn't feel like your children are being ripped away and you're only seeing them in these like facilities that are where you're being observed through windows by like social workers. It would feel like your children need to go live a few blocks away right now, but you're going to get to see them and you're going to get to interact with them daily. It's just you need to learn some things about parenting, and we're going to help you do that. That's not the vibe that the world that Gia lives in feels like, right?
No.
And it's not the vibe of the actual world in America. Like I said, it's very clinical, cold, it's detached. And in the same way that people who get released from prison never really go through the type of like therapy they need to go through, the skill training that they need to go through in order to make something of themselves in a very cold, awful world. The same thing is happening to people like Gia. She'll get her kids back. Maybe they won't get taken away again. Maybe they will get taken away again. It's almost like, it's just like rolling dice. It seems like it's just, will the circumstances of your life go well? Or will some unexpected horrible thing happen? Or will you have a weak moment where you do something that you know you shouldn't do, but it's not like something that's going to kill you. But if you get caught, then you're fucked again, because you're already in that system where you're being like the panopticon, right? Where everybody's being observed all the time. And so you can't even make a mistake without, fucking everything up.
Yeah.
And I also liked the way the film levied a rejection of Christianity.
Yeah.
With her friend Trina being a Bible thumper. And the film not portraying that as virtuous, portraying it as someone wanting to pass judgment on Gia, wanting to sort of promote that kind of bootstraps ideology of, well, Gia, you need to get yourself together, and you have to raise your children because that's your job, is to raise your children, but never. And like Trina's in this system. So Trina knows how difficult the things she's asking her friend to do are, because Trina's in the middle of it too.
Yeah, like Trina is also very pregnant and taking the same courses. So the assumption is maybe one or two children are also having been taken away from her. But she is, well, she's like, well, I'm different because I'm participating in the class. I'm actually talking in the class, so they'll acknowledge me as a good person. And she tells Gia, like, you need to talk more, you need to participate more. If not, like, that's when you get points deduct and nobody will talk up for you. But it's like Gia is sharing a car. She is sharing a place of living, which they do intelligently enough, like show like afterwards, like her roommate is a drug dealer.
It's her sister.
Yes. And is a drug dealer and therefore like is not suitable for her to be living / working with, like living and working with, because it's just sort of like if they find out what her sister does, then the kids will never be seen again. And they also tell her like at the beginning, like, hey, we're gonna let you breastfeed your child and then we'll probably take them away. And it is like that of them just saying, yeah, you'll have your child for a little bit, for a few months.
Well, it's dehumanizing her.
And it's just like making her into just an animal that is breeding. And then how her friend in turn is sort of like, but if you just go by God, if you just work harder, if you just don't sleep. And the thing is, like, she needs the car. She needs the car to go visit her kids. And she gets points deducted because she's late. When she can't control the traffic, she is, like, we hear her cell phone constantly on the verge of being, like, turned off because she doesn't have enough minutes on it. So her last minutes before she's, like, about to give birth is to call her friend Mel so they can come pick her up to take her to the hospital. Because I remember you going, like, oh, well, what if you call 911? I was like, but the cost of an ambulance. She's already in
Well, I
her
mean, I
head
knew
being
there was
like,
cost of an ambulance, but
yeah.
I thought, like, if it's an emergency and you don't have access to a car, like, it sucks. But what are you going to do?
But I think it's like her mind was just sort of like, I can't accrue that expense. Like, it's going to be another thing dodged against me. And it is this heartbreaking thing that at the least, like, yes, this Black family wants to adopt a Black child because Miss C's like, they'll go overseas. They don't have to worry about the child, like, the biological mother deciding that they don't want to do this. Like, it's easier if you go overseas, but if it's here, like, someone could change their mind. And it is Gia dealing with that idea, right? As she also, for example, goes to the family's house and watches them from the window. Where she's seeing this is a nice life, and she has more connection to their daughter who's closer in age to her.
Yeah.
And is asking the daughter, like, just make sure that my kid
is protected.
And like, she can't connect to the parents, she can connect to her. And it's this interesting thing that Gia never says, I can't get what you have because I'm poor. No. It's like
that's the unspoken.
Yeah, Amber thing, is so sweet where she's like, no, you could still go to college. And she's like, my dreams have changed. She doesn't say my dreams are gone, or that doesn't. She's like, my dreams have changed, because she doesn't want to dishearten the other girl.
Yeah. And I think it was a great debut feature. I don't think it'll be on my favorite films of the year list for me personally, just because that dialogue was so glaring to me. But she is a director that I will be keeping my eyes on and seeing what she has coming next. And I'm hoping that, as she sort of refines that aspect of her filmmaking, that we're going to see some very good, once again, in this sort of American neo-realist style about class and the struggle to survive in the modern world, because there are movies that we need more of right now. We need to get away from everything being escapist all the time at your local movie theater and have some movies that are, about life and the way it's lived. In 1964 Massachusetts, a young secretary becomes enchanted by Rebecca, the glamorous new counselor at the boys' prison where she works. Their budding friendship soon takes a twisted turn when Rebecca reveals a dark secret. This is Eileen, a new film directed by William Oldroy, based on a book by Ottessa Moshfegh, a book which I read this year, and I believe will probably be my favorite fiction read of 2023. So Ariana, you first, being someone that was unfamiliar with the story or where it was going to go, what did you think of Eileen?
I really enjoyed Eileen. I think it should have been gayer, but that's just my response to it.
It was as gay as the book gets.
Yeah. And it's I mean, I've never thought of Anne Hathaway as like being unattractive, but this film, I was like, I get it. I get it.
Unattractive or attractive?
Attractive.
Oh, okay. So the film centers on Eileen, played by Thomasin McKenzie, who I believe is Australian or New Zealand. I know people from either country are going to be insulted if you say they're from one or the
I
other.
think she's New Zealand.
I was thinking New Zealand too, but I wasn't 100%. Yeah, she's a Kiwi. I would just want to call him a New Zealander. I feel like that should be the name. And I've seen her in some things. I really liked her in Leave No Trace from a few years back with Ben Foster.
Mm-hmm.
They play the father-daughter homeless pair, and they're kind of like Earth Mama a little bit. It's kind of them being drugged through the system and finding that like they just cannot, or especially he cannot click with the system.
Yeah.
And so Mackenzie was one of these actresses where I was like, oh, I think there's like great performances in this actress. I was very disappointed in Last Night in Soho, but I don't really think that was her fault so much as Edgar Wright.
I think it was Edgar Wright. Just like it was one of the first times that he ever centered a female character, and it just showed you the severe lack of understanding of women in that film.
Yeah, it was a little too stylized, which is weird to say about an Edgar Wright movie.
Yeah,
but for that story, I just felt it could have used with a little less stylization. So you get to Eileen, certainly not a bombastic movie. I saw a lot of reviews on Letterboxd where people were talking about like, yeah, the man sitting a few rows in front of me was snoring for the last 40 minutes of the movie. You know, oh, this woman in my theater kept checking her phone during the movie. And it isn't a movie for people that want like dopamine hits. This is a movie that settles into a certain mood like as soon as it starts, and it just kind of hangs out there the whole movie. But I think the story it's telling and the performances on display are incredibly good. We'll get into our big lead performances, but I kind of want to talk about some of the smaller ones. Siobhan Fallon Hogan as Mrs. Murray, who's kind of the head of the sort of typing pool in the office. Proving once again what a fucking fantastic character actress she is. I know her originally from SNL. She was kind of in that late Chris Farley period, but she's also been in a couple...
Fred the movie.
Yeah, Fred the movie. She was in Lars von Trier's Dancer in the Dark as a prison guard.
Oh,
she was in Dogville as the woman who is the caretaker of the church.
Yes.
She was in Michael Haneke's remake of Funny Games, which I don't think you've seen. You saw the original one.
Yeah, I saw the original. I have not made the remake.
She plays the sort of neighbor on the other side of the lake. So once again, always very small roles, but she does fantastic things with them. And I think this might be one of my favorite one of Siobhan's roles, where she is just so... She channels that, like, I mean, like, I have to... Is she from, like, Massachusetts or the Boston area? Because she sure seemed like she was native. Syracuse, New York. So, yeah, kind of similar-ish. But very, like, northeastern, kind of, like, turned into just a hard, nasty person by just the nature of the weather. Because it's all set during winter around Christmas time.
Yeah.
And it's just the filthiest... winter. Like what the opening scene involves a shot of snow that clearly has been pissed in and someone picking up a big handful of it. And so yeah, I loved Siobhan's performance in this movie.
Yeah.
That's all you gotta say?
I think she was great. I think the one actor that really just, I was just like, oh my God, was Marin, I think. Marin Ireland.
And it's not until the end of the movie, not the climax.
You know, the key moment of her performance, I was just like, oh, fuck. Because she's got to deliver you some information that's just punching you in the gut. And and like, the thing is, like, it's not as if she stops talking. She keeps going. And you're just like, oh, shit.
You think it can't get worse. She apparently is a big stage actress who's known for that. But I remember we saw her in The Dark and the Wicked, which was a very disappointing movie. I don't blame her for that at all.
Didn't the director get mad at you?
Well, I don't know. Maybe somebody on the promotion team, because I shared my review on Twitter after we watched it, and I was
before it turned into X, right?
Huh?
Before it turned into X.
I don't acknowledge X. It's Twitter. I don't care what he changes the name to. But yeah, I remember posting my review of The Dark and the Wicked, and I guess they didn't like it because I said it felt like a movie that was hinting at an explanation, but never coherently. And then by the end, you're just kind of like, why did all that happen? And they didn't like it. And I responded to them after they like posted some shitty response that I said, I don't get paid to do this. I'm just a hobbyist. It's weird that you would want to put forth the energy to do something like that. And then they blocked me. But I had screenshot all of their stuff at that point. So yeah, if you go to my review on the website, I put the screenshots up there because of how much I didn't like the movie. And then their response made it worse. But Maren Ireland, though, she was not bad in that movie.
No.
She also had a small role in The Hollow Man.
The Empty Man.
Or The Empty Man, yeah. Is there a movie called The Hollow Man? I think
I
that's the Kevin Bacon Invisible Man movie. That's what it is. But yeah, the Empty Man, which is a great film too. But yeah, you're right. Maren Ireland, we only see her twice in the movie because she comes for a visit at the prison, and it's very brief.
Yeah.
And so her only real scene with where she has like some interaction with Eileen over filling out of an application because she's never been to prison to visit her son. But then, yeah, that climactic scene
Oh God.
where she explains why her son's in the prison and what was happening in her home. Like, it really is some of the hardest dialogue for a person to deliver. And it is harrowing.
Yes. It is.
And then the range of emotions, you see her go through like horror and then acceptance.
And just being like, I don't want to be alone.
And just broken. Like, this woman is so broken and she just does it so well. But yeah, it's a movie built on the backs of strong female performances because there's only one standout male performance in the movie to me, and that's Shea Wiggum as Jim, Eileen's dad, the retired cop.
And they don't focus too much on him, thankfully.
In the book, there's a lot more of her talking about him because in the book, it's all first person point of view. And we'll talk about why I think there are some things in the book that make the story a little better in the book. But I would say the dad, you get a lot more insight into what's going on with him in the book. The movie, he's very much a background character, but he is still just a nasty son of a bitch toward his own daughter. Yeah. Like, constantly insulting her, constantly talking about how confident he is. She's never going to find anyone who will marry her. She's never going to have kids. He like makes a big deal of talking about how much she stinks when she's around him. Yeah. And it's just this brutality he shows to her. Yeah. Verbally. He never strikes her, but it's just, she is not made to feel loved in the home she grew up in and still lives in. What did you think of Wiggum's performance in that role?
I think he was great. I think I think it's just also there's not much to him, right? There's not much to the character. You're just like, he is just a massive like jerk.
He's a physical representation of ACAB.
Yes. And it's like, I feel like this is a very anti-cop movie at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's
it is
not just cops, but like the types of people that are produced as a result of cops being in society. Yeah.
And it's just how, like, the conversations of it being that we find out that Eileen has an older sister who is married and refuses to talk to her father.
Well, in the book, she comes to visit for Christmas.
Okay.
But that's it. That's like, she only visits like at Christmas and Easter or something. And then they live in Boston proper, I think. And so we do get a brief like chapter with her in the book. But I could see why they cut that out, because I don't think it really plays into the central relationship, which is Eileen and Rebecca. Yeah. And that William Oldroy, one thing I want to give him is this movie is an hour and 30 on the nose. He cut this down to the core aspects of the movie. There's people complaining on Letterboxd a little because they said they didn't feel like there was much to analyze about the story in their opinion. Yeah. I think there is a lot there. I think it's just delivered in a more subtle way than people expect. I think today people expect that sort of A24 slap you in the face kind of thing. Yeah. And this is a movie that is much more measured in taking its time, but still not wasting time. every scene matters. Every scene establishes something about the characters or builds towards the end of the film. And so we get to our big central performances here. So first, what did you think of Anne Hathaway as Rebecca?
I thought she was great. I thought I I feel as if there was a movie that we watched her like, and she was doing an accent. It was like that movie that you talk about all the time. It's about that Jewish boy that's friends with a black kid, and how even he ends up failing the black kid because his family's like, fuck this, we're not doing anything about this. What was the name of it? I think it starts with R.
Well, it just came out last year. It was Armageddon Time.
Yeah.
You thought R because it's Armageddon.
Yeah.
Is that how you spell Armageddon?
Yep.
R and then Mageddon.
Armageddon.
And I think Armageddon Time is a film that is a lot better than it gets credit for. There's a lot of people that shit on it. But I think James Gray did an excellent job of extrapolating things from his own biography and showcasing, like, it's another movie about how cruel the world is towards black people and how white children are often very unaware of it and are often much more immature than their black peers.
Yeah, and so Anne Hathaway in that film does an accent, and in this one she's kind of doing another one,
which is like a New York accent.
Yes.
And
but she does it. There's just something that feels effortless about this performance of hers, as if like, oh, you've been waiting for her to do something like this for a while. That it
feels mature.
Yes, it feels mature. It doesn't feel like there's any resemblance of her of an actual person, and how she feels unlike any other person within where Eileen works, right?
Well, it makes her, she's a mysterious figure that draws Eileen in, because all the people Eileen is surrounded by are just angry, grumpy, sullen pieces of shit. Including Eileen herself is angry and grumpy most of the time. And so, Rebecca is this sort of ray of sunshine. To get a sense of like the Eileen character, the film opens with one of the things she does is parks her car at a popular makeout spot and then like watches other couples, will get aroused and then grabs a handful of snow and shoves it down her own underwear to stop herself. In the book, you get much more of this. She's a very masochistic person. And I think that probably comes from, that Catholic background, that Irish Catholic kind of thing.
Also the way her father treats her.
Yeah, and it's this culture of women are not seen as having value other than being wives.
Mm-hmm.
And because Eileen is in her like mid to late 20s, she is unmarried. She doesn't look like she has any prospects of ever getting married. The book confuses things a little bit more. There's a whole subplot in the book about her stalking one of the male guards at the prison she works at and having like a sexual obsession with him. I do kind of like that in this movie they cut that out, and you could read it as she is a lesbian in a society at a time where she can't be out as a lesbian. So she's just miserable, and these people around her aren't helping because they're miserable too, because no one's ever done the things that would make them happy in their lives.
Well, she does have a scene where she like imagines like being like ravaged by one of the guards. It's also like images of her chewing and sucking on chocolates and spitting them out,
so she doesn't gain weight.
Sniffing her fingers after she's masturbated for a little bit, but then gets like interrupted because like the alarm goes off that visiting hours are done. Her watching certain people within the prison and never really speaking to them once they notice that she's staring, because it's just sort of like, I think it's like she's been made to feel ugly and unappreciated all her life, that she has no way to respond to them. And so like, even if someone were to, she's like, it's a character that's like, if she were to be given a compliment, she would not know how to take it.
Well, I think Rebecca does compliment her and she doesn't know how to take it.
Yeah. And it's like, and so Rebecca, who comes in, who is taking over for one of like the counselors, and manages to walk in on Eileen having dropped a file of one of the kids that she watches occasionally from afar. And that's when she picks it up and starts having an interest in this character called Lee. and it's like supposed to be like images of the crime he committed, but it's also like this like I have to remind myself is like I'm just surprised that they would have that at the prison, but it's a prison for boys.
Well,
like
and it would be for the psychologists, right? So they
yes,
could get a full sense of like what the boy did, why he might have done it, and so those crime scene photos, I guess, would aid in that.
yeah.
Because it would show you like how brutal was it.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing I want to talk about is this idea that I sort of came up with watching it as a film. I didn't have this idea when I was reading the book, that there may be two Rebeccas in this movie, because there is a constant, a repeated thing that will happen with Eileen where a scene will happen and we're led to believe it's happening in real life, but then she will do something very drastic and then it will cut in a way that you realize like, oh, that was just one of her hallucinations. For example, she is given her dad's gun because he's a drunkard and will go out into the street and point it at school children as they're walking home.
Yeah.
And she's handed the gun, puts the barrel to her chin, pulls the trigger, blows her brains out. And then we cut to like her in the bathtub, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's this thing of Eileen, and her father even kind of points this out to her, like, you're insignificant. I think he says to her at one point that she's just an insignificant person. And so she lives her life in this insignificance, but inside of her head, she has these elaborate fantasies of if she had the guts, she'd do this or I'd do that. Like you said, the officer ravaging her.
Yeah, it's also like that interesting thing is, for example, that conversation that she has with her father about being an insignificant person. They do happen to chance talk about Lee, because Lee's father was a policeman.
And in the book, I'm not sure if Lee's family knew them. I think that, I don't know. I think that might be something added to the film.
But it's supposed to be like, her father at the least knew the dad because he was a policeman, and that was a big deal. And like they start talking about Lee having stabbed his father, the amount of times he stabbed it, and he like, and her father is like, you would never do that, you're not that brave. And then she would like, what if I had a gun? This is before she gets his gun though.
Yeah.
And he pauses and he goes, I can see it. You with a gun killing me, I can see it. And it's like this weird admission that it's sort of like him being like, if it's the death would have to be quick. Like you're too much of a wimp to do it.
You don't want to be up close when it happens, kind of a thing. So then it becomes Rebecca, because there is a moment that stuck out to me in the film that had me wondering how much of what we're seeing in interactions between Eileen and Rebecca are actually happening. Because when she comes into the office and Rebecca is gone for Christmas.
Yeah.
And never told Eileen. And there's one way of reading that as it's because Rebecca's done something and she's done this in a hurry, right? Or it is that Rebecca really is gone for Christmas and there's no reason for her to tell Eileen because she and Eileen aren't actually friends. They haven't hung out. They've talked at the office.
Yeah.
And that Eileen has hallucinated this other stuff.
Like them hanging out at the bar.
Because it is not Rebecca who shows an interest in Lee Polk's file. It is Eileen who shows an interest in Lee Polk. She spies on him in his cell. She's the one getting out his folder. This is nothing that Rebecca's ever involved in until this sudden point when like Rebecca suddenly becomes interested in it.
Yeah, because then when she drops the file, what I thought was interesting is Eileen's looking at it, and then Rebecca helps her pick it up, sees the pictures, start talking about how, you know, there's a reason that kids like this end up doing it. And sometimes in order to repair that, somebody has to die. And she takes the file. Like Eileen no longer has the file. It's Rebecca who has it. And that's when we have the whole thing of the mom coming to visit, the confrontation that happens after during the visiting hours. Rebecca returning, not like Eileen returning Rebecca's notebook. And she's like, you didn't read it, right? And she's like, oh, no. And then like, it was like, she's in the middle of talking to Lee. And that's when she stops like Eileen after she's closed her door and asks her for a drink, telling her, I don't know anybody. So
because I feel like every interaction between Rebecca and Eileen is not really witnessed by anyone except for the bar.
Yeah. And then afterwards, she returns to the bar to have more drinks.
By herself.
Yeah.
So the question for me was, did Rebecca go to the bar with her, or is she having this sort of dissociative disorder thing, and she's imagining a version of Rebecca? Because it's everything someone like Eileen would want. A beautiful, glamorous new person shows up at her workplace, and of all the people that works there, the one she wants to be friends with is Eileen, someone whose father has made her feel insignificant her entire life, whose coworkers don't like her, who barely speaks a word at work. It's one of those where it's like, it's too good to be true kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then, especially, we won't talk about the details of the ending. The decisions that Eileen makes shows someone to me that is clearly having a mental break with reality in a severe way. And that's when I started to think, how much of the movie is literally happening and how much is in Eileen's head? Is it Eileen who does the horrible thing by herself at the end of the movie? And that's why Rebecca never shows up, because Rebecca was never there. Rather than, because like no police show up at Eileen's house.
Yeah.
And you would think that if Rebecca stayed behind, the way they kind of showed her kind of panicky and shocked, that's what would have happened, but it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's Oldroy, the director here, has created this sort of unanswerable puzzle that you can just kind of think about, and you can read it from these different angles.
Yeah,
you can
it
read
could
it
be-
as all of this literally happens to Eileen, or Eileen devolves into this obscene fantasy. And even, does she kill someone? Does she
Yeah.
not kill someone? I don't know, because the only person who's a witness to the potential murder is someone that I'm not sure Eileen was actually spending that much time with.
Yeah, and it's also like would have also been an accomplice to everything.
Because the bar may have happened because her father does answer the phone.
Yeah.
And that makes me think like maybe they did go hang out at the bar, but that was the extent of it. And that especially the big...
Well, no. Remember, the bar thing was her asking her after she had interrupted her in a session with Lee. She's like, hey, wait, before you go.
Well, because she does call and it's like she wants her to come over.
Yes.
Right? So that's one of those where, like, once again, maybe she hallucinates her dad handing her the phone. Like,
yeah,
this young woman is clearly not well.
mm-hmm.
And we see so many hallucinations in the film that anything could be a hallucination,
or it just
that feeds into this.
It's also the fact that like
life.
This woman's a psychologist and she's taking advantage of someone that she sees as completely neglected.
Yeah.
And it's like, it is that dynamic that if you are a new person and you're feeling like everyone is already sourly and weird, you'd probably be like, let me just go chum it up with this young person. Maybe they have a little bit more life in them, or they don't have the same type of views. Because I did love, like, in the bar, she's kind of like, is everyone like this? And she's like, yeah. She's like
rotten and horrible.
She's like, it's cold and miserable. People are awful here.
And it's a small town. There's not much to do.
Yeah.
Like, they go to the one bar in town, and it's a bunch of, like, guys who just got off of work who want to, like, if a woman shows up in the bar, just going to be the crudest, gross guys. I thought a lot of the cinematography was really good. It had a very naturalistic look to it, but there was this use of red throughout the movie,
mm-hmm.
where they would just kind of paint everything in this red light. I feel like every home in the movie was very hellish. They were like dark caverns that you would go into. They did not feel homey or warm.
Yeah.
They felt very cold, dark, underlit on purpose,
mm-hmm.
which also kind of reflects that kind of like hibernatory, like winter feel of this is a place where everybody is just like an angry sleeping bear kind of thing.
Yeah.
Even like, of course you would expect, the prison is very unpleasant, but then when you go to, everybody's houses, or you go to the bar, every location just feels gross and grimy. And I really appreciated how true to the period the film felt, because it's set in 1964, and I felt costumes, production design, the music choices. It was a choice of like a lot of jazz music of the period, and then a few like pop tunes. And that felt like it grounded it, the hairstyles, everything. And oftentimes we get a lot of period films that I feel don't take advantage of the time that they're set in. They always kind of are like, oh, we're set, in the 60s. and maybe we'll have some people with sideburns and bell bottoms, but that's about it. This really felt like they recreated, a Massachusetts town in the
because
early
like
60s.
the styles were a little bit older. Any dresses that Eileen wore more like 1950s dresses because they were supposed to be her mother's.
So it was like what 1964 probably actually looked like, as opposed to what most movies make the 60s look like.
Yeah,
where it's that early part of the 60s was just a continuation of the 50s for most people. In the text, because the film is narrated from Eileen's point of view, there is a lot more reflection. I'll tell you that in the book, she talks about having gotten married since all of that happened. And she lives far away and nobody knows anything about where she came from. She lied to them about who she is.
Okay.
But then once again, she's an unreliable narrator, so you're not sure, is this another delusion Eileen is having like what's real here? And so she's looking back on these events decades after they happened. And that does add another layer to the story of an old woman who, at the point she's telling the story is probably in her 70s.
Yeah.
And that does frame it differently than a third-person perspective that only happens within the boundaries of the narrative. There's nothing in this movie that happens outside of, Eileen's experience at that time.
Yeah.
And so I think it does make them very different experiences. I would say if you liked the film, I would definitely recommend reading the book, because you go deep into Eileen's head. She is someone full of neuroses and like weird sexual hangups. And like I said, very masochistic, which has led her to become very cynical about every other person that she encounters, because she treats herself so cruelly. Would you recommend Eileen to our audience?
Yes, I would.
And what would be your reasons for recommending it?
I think it's such a fascinating film to have watched, and I felt like it understood what type of aesthetic and tone that it needed to grasp. I like the fact that you were saying that you expected it to have like a narration during it, like a narrative voice, but there wasn't, so you were just kind of like having to interpret the scenes as you watched them, and
you were more observing Eileen than being in Eileen's head.
Exactly.
But yeah, I would recommend it if you're someone who wants something that's challenging. Like I said, this movie is only an hour and 38 minutes long, so it's not something that's going to eat up your entire night, but I think you're going to get a film in which every single scene serves a purpose, and every single scene tells us something about the characters in those scenes. Great performances from every actor in the movie. I don't think I saw a single performance where I felt like somebody stuck out as not great. You don't get a lot from a ton of actors. It is a very like small cast of central characters, but everyone does great, even those small roles. Like you were saying, Marin Ireland, who delivers this monologue near the end of the movie, just like I remember looking over at you and your mouth was hanging open. And me having read the book, I knew what she was going to say and confess to. And I was very interested to see your reaction and just the look of shock and disgust on your face. It just kept going. And it's something that like even someone like Eileen, who feels very disturbed, it affects her in a profound way. Like she can't stomach it. But yeah, Eileen, great Christmas film for the whole family. If they're around, go take them to see it. I'm sure you have a great time. Well, that was the Pop Cult Podcast for this week. We hope you enjoyed our episode, and make sure to check out our show notes for lots of relevant links to things related to our podcast, as well as our website, popcult.blog. Make sure to subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes are available. If you visit popcult.blog right now, we're in the midst of a 2-week series that I'm calling A Different Kind of Christmas, where we're looking at Christmas movies and specials that aren't a part of the official canon and kind of deciding should they be or not. Coming up in this next week, we'll be finishing it up by looking at Knowing Me, Knowing Yule, the Alan Partridge Christmas special, the film Rare Exports, as well as one of the Muppet Christmas specials. In the second half of December, we're going to be trying to cram in as many of the critically acclaimed, highly rated films that have come out in 2023, reviewing those on the blog. We have one more podcast before we have two big special ones, and we might be able to talk about some of them on there. But yeah, just trying to see the best of the best. Regarding our podcast, the next episode will be a normal one, but then the one following that will be on Christmas Eve, and it's going to be an extra long episode. We are going to look at two Christmas classics that neither, or I've seen one of them. Ariana hasn't seen either of them. Miracle on 34th Street, the original one, and The Shop Around the Corner. Plus, we're going to kind of do what we did at Halloween and watch 5 Christmas episodes of popular American television shows and kind of see how do they stack up. When we get to our New Year's Eve episode, which will be the following week, we will be doing our top 5 favorite films of the year, plus looking at other media that we really enjoyed in 2023. Plus, much like our Christmas episode, we're going to be looking at New Year's Eve episodes of shows, not just American, but also British. And that's a genre of episode there's not as many of. So I was very interested to see, what does a New Year's Eve episode of a show look like? If you enjoy what we do here on Pop Cult, we would encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have lots of reward levels for you to pick from. I want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the Writers Room level. When you donate at that level, you get to pick one movie a month. We will watch it, review it, and you can even add your own thoughts to that review if that's something you want to do. We also have for every tier of our Patreon, patron-exclusive podcasts. We've done a few series. Right now, we're doing one where Ariana and I play a GM-less co-op tabletop roleplay experience called Screenplay. We're having a lot of fun with that. We think that might be one we kind of put in the rotation. So by subscribing to Patreon, you get lots of extra stuff. Well, until next time, you keep listening and we'll keep watching.